going live. It should be a couple of minutes. Zoom is just setting it up.
Vimeo.
Yeah.
Well, it says this is good. We'll be starting in 8 minutes. Anyway, it looks good.
It should be getting a feed there now.
Yeah, we got it there. Yeah.
Have you got it there?
Vimeo. Yes, got that.
Okay. Just put that there out of the way. Sorry if I look a little bit distant. It's just with two cameras. Don't know which one I'm on.
That's the one with the red light under you, isn't it? Isn't that the way it works?
Well, the Zoom, the Logitech is got that, but the Sony camera doesn't.
Okay.
What I was actually going to do is in a minute log into another ID so that I have a backup PC, because if the system goes down and I go down, then the whole event collapses. That's why I've also put the co-host.
Well, if the host disappears, the co-host picks up, don't they? I thought the co-host picked up, but I might be wrong.
It should, so I'm going to do another co-host as a final thing.
Thank you.
So, everybody all set?
Yep.
We've got another 7 minutes to amuse ourselves. So bear with me while I get.
Driving.
I'm going to have a think about what I'm going to talk about.
And she stopped the car in the middle of the road, stopped all the traffic because there was a dog on the wanted to cross the road, and she stopped the traffic both ways and got the dog to cross the road. It was a little Shih Tzu. You know that joke about the zoo for dogs only. You ever hear that?
No.
The Shih Tzu. Bad one, all right. Look, my son told me that one.
Well, you're looking well, Simon.
Start at the top of the hour, right on the top of the hour. So you want people coming in early, or are you trying to welcome people in at the top of the hour and start a little later?
What would you like, Simon?
I'd rather start a little later and let everybody come in, because people are always going to be late, aren't they?
What I'd suggest is we start letting people in. It says there's 10 people, but there's only a few of us on.
Wait until there's a few in the waiting room.
Your volume is a bit low, Manoj.
It's because the speaker's a bit further away.
Okay.
And if I could keep on switching, there's a bug. There's a limit to how many speakers you can connect in Windows, and then it crashes. So that's why I'm a bit nervous.
Okay, I know. Just
keeping you have no idea about technical hitches. The recording stops, the PC crashes, the network goes down. We're trying to get as resilient as a TV operation.
Why do I look so red and shiny? Are you made up, Roger? Have you got pancake mixture on? You look cool and collected, and
that's the lighting. If I go Alexa, office spotlights on. Okay. Then I get some spotlights. I've just got a warmer light in the room.
Yeah, I don't know how to get rid of, because I'm not this red. That's not me. And
if you go into your video settings, there are various things you can do in there. They've now got there's one of the settings is touch up my appearance, and you can scroll that.
Yeah.
I don't know if
you look good, Simon. You look good.
No, I look red.
It's just the low light. Have you got?
I've got a ring light on the camera, and I've got a green screen behind me that's backlit.
You look like Donald Trump.
Oh, thanks. Cheers. You fill me with confidence.
But there are those two settings to try in the camera settings for Zoom.
Oh, actually in Zoom, because I couldn't find anything in Zoom. I can find false eyebrows and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, in the advanced. If you go to just the up arrow by the side of stop video, that'll take you into the video settings page, and there's two headings there under my video. Touch up my appearance, low light.
Shall I start letting some people in? It's always a good idea.
Let's just get Simon fixed with his lighting there.
Simon, are you all right?
Hold on just one sec. So video, touch up my appearance.
You can try that. It's kind of smooths things out, and adjust the low light is the other one. You can put that on or not. and then see which you prefer.
They're all the same. I just get pinker and pinker. I don't know why. This is really weird. Oh, it doesn't matter.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. It's great to see so many people joining us. If you can hear me, if you'd like to just announce who you are from, that'd be really helpful, just so we can get a feel for where everybody's coming from tonight.
Well, hi, I'm Pat King here. I'm from Wicklow, in just south of Dublin, in Ireland.
So I'm Roger from Staffordshire, England.
Martin from Canada.
Hi, Martin. Good to see you.
Sorry, my voice.
Okay. If you'd like to just type into the chat where you're all from, then we can kind of put names to faces and places, can't we?
Vancouver, Canada.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ali from Seattle.
Hi, Ali. Good to see you. Welcome. Alejandra from Dublin. Have I pronounced that right, Alejandra, or is it Ali? Yeah. Oh, good. Very good. Patriva from Dublin. We're all from all over the place. Great. It's good to see so many people. Thank you for joining us.
Particularly grateful to the Americans who've joined us on this important day.
Of course. Yes.
Maybe it's a good way of escaping from non-stop rolling news.
That's what I've been doing in the past couple of days.
Yeah.
Blocking most of my social media.
Keep out of the way. I shan't ask you for your forecast because we'll be here all night. But I hope it's...
Pat, is the Vimeo feed working all right?
I can check again now. Yes, it is. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Pat.
Hi, Sean and Geraldine from Dublin. So we've got quite a few from Dublin today. That's great to see.
Apparently it's the goodest country on earth.
There we go. So we're going to be starting in just a couple of minutes. It's great to see you all joining us tonight. So is this so how many people, for how many people is this the first time they've joined us, and how many people have joined us before?
I've never joined such a meeting before. I mean, I've had the chance to chat with Simon a couple of times on LinkedIn before, but that's the first time I'm joining the meetings like this. Okay, so Sean, it's your third version. Great, welcome. Third time lucky, so it's going to be the best one yet. There we go. Geraldine, it's your first time. There you go. Fong, Fong, where are you from?
Hello. So I'm actually based in Sweden, but I was born in Vietnam, so it's a little confusing. Yeah. Well, welcome. I'm glad you could join us tonight. Pleasure.
Anna Cecile here so Anna Cecile, where are you from?
Hi, I'm also a very strange case. I'm from originally Guinea, but I grew up in Norway and now I live in Ireland.
Oh, very good. You've got really well traveled. Well, glad you could join us here. First time from Martin too. So I'd be interested to know where you came across the link to join us tonight, or this afternoon if you're in America. So which part of our marketing worked best?
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, okay, great. I can see a number of nodding heads. So LinkedIn, I think is, yeah, a lot of people found us from LinkedIn. Great, thank you.
This meeting is being recorded.
Email from Easy Peasy, thank you. Eventbrite. And Manage It a Good Friend, great. I can see lots of people joining us now. It's just gone past the top of the hour, so that's why there's so many people joining us. If you're just joining us, it'd be lovely if you wouldn't mind just saying what your name is and where you're from. Just type that into the chat, just to the so use the chat box and just tell us where you're from. That'll be really interesting to know. And then maybe there's some people who are from the same country might even want to communicate. Hey,
I want to say hi to Martin Horvath. Hi, Martin. I want to say hi to Hans van den Berg. I want to say hi to Paul Brammer, who I see on Twitter every day. And if I carry on like this, I'll be here all night. Anyway, lots of friends. It's really good of you all to show up. Thank you.
Hi, Rory McKinley is my name. So
Good to see you. Thank you. So I can see Paul Brammer in the middle there. I think is that the same Paul Brammer that I know from over the road? Good. Look at that. How would you believe it that Paul and I actually live about less than half a mile from each other?
There you go.
Opposite sides of the road, though. Good to see you, Paul.
We have 42 in the meeting now.
That's life, the universe, and everything, isn't it? Or the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. That's a good number to be. And Dr. Kevin Lee Elder is quarantined. Oh dear. Being locked down. Well, good to see you all joining us. Thank you for joining us. From all the newcomers, thank you for coming along tonight. Or this afternoon or this morning, depending upon where you're joining us from.
Who just left the room?
Josh, living in Spain from the UK. Thank you.
We will be starting in a minute or two now.
Lockdown in Amsterdam.
Hi everybody, and especially Roger and Simon.
Yeah, good to see you, my friend.
Yeah. In a rainy night.
It is a bit wet, isn't it?
Where's it wet? In Ireland?
No, Paul and I live in Staffordshire.
Oh, in Staffordshire.
It's not raining at the moment.
A friend of mine, when I went to visit Northern Ireland, a friend of mine said, "You see that mountain over there, or that hill?" He said, "If you can see it, it's because if you can't see it, it's because it's raining, and if you can see it, it's because it's going to rain."
Yes, yes. That's nearly as good as my joke earlier.
In the Faroe Islands, they say if you don't like the weather, wait.
Yes.
You can get 4 seasons in a morning there. It's unbelievable.
Good gracious. I'm told that in England, we don't get weather, we just get samples. My American friends chipping in for me. We're going to be starting very soon now. It's nearly 7:05 in the UK. And I can see Simon's getting ready to get started. So I'm going to ask everybody to mute. In just a moment, I'm going to ask everybody to make sure they're muted, so that when Simon does get started, we won't interrupt him with any extraneous sounds from wherever we are.
Okay, we're 51 joining us now.
Okay, Simon, shall I introduce you?
Let's go ahead if you feel you've got something to say on the subject.
Okay. Simon is an independent policy advisor who has worked with heads of state and heads of government of 56 nations to help improve their economic, political, and cultural engagement with the international community. Simon publishes the Good Country Index, a study measuring the impact of each of 163 countries on the rest of humanity and the planet. His TED Talk launching the first edition of the GCI has passed 10 million views and has been ranked by TED viewers as the 4th most inspiring ever published. Simon's latest book, The Good Country Equation, was published last month and has been described by Zaid Rad Al Hussein, the UN Commissioner on Human Rights, as a masterpiece. What we're also very lucky to do is to have Simon's special offer for Simon's new book. So I'm going to put that in the chat link. And in the meantime, let me hand over to Simon. Simon, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Manoj, and hello everybody. Thank you so much for coming along. I have to apologize for my face. For some reason, it's coming out very bright pink and very shiny. I promise you I don't normally look like this. I tried to fix the camera and I can't. So pretend I'm beautiful and everything will go much more smoothly. So what I'd like to do is just to talk for really no more than about 25 minutes, so that I can leave as much time as possible for some discussion with all of you afterwards, because that's always my favorite part of these kinds of events and always the most valuable part for me. But let me just try and set the scene. I'll roughly follow the storyline of my book because that has a kind of logical, chronological pathway along it. When I started working for governments more than 20 years ago, I had an interesting specialism. I was very interested in the images of countries. And this was partly because this was a subject that was beginning to achieve a certain amount of salience here in the UK, but also around the world. And I wrote a paper in an academic journal in 1998, in which I claimed that in our age of advanced globalization, the images of countries had become paradoxically almost more important than the reality. Why did I say that? Well, because it's so obvious that countries depend so much on trade, international trade, in so many different ways. The tourists that they get, the investment that they get, their ability to sell and export their products and services worldwide. And all of these factors depend so much on how we perceive those countries. And it's more important than the reality for the simple reason that most of us know very little about the reality of most other countries. There are just too many of them. The last time I checked, there were 195. And even those of us who work in international jobs probably don't know all that much, if we're honest, about all of those nearly 200 countries. And so what do? In order to navigate through the complexity of this world, we make do with simple, shallow cliches and stereotypes. And most of them come from the culture around us. We learn them, we pick them up as we grow up. We pick them up from the media, we pick them up from literature, we pick them up from the cinema, we pick them up from our friends and our family. And we end up believing certain things about certain countries. And they're often untrue, they're often very unfair, they're often very out of date. And yet truly those cliches, those stereotypes determine the fate of nations. Because a country that has a powerful and positive image finds that everything is easy and everything is cheap. If you're lucky enough to be somewhere like Sweden, which has got such a good image, everybody thinks Sweden is wonderful. And if you want to attract tourists, or you want to attract talented migrants, or you want to attract investment, it's easy because everybody already knows that's where they want to go. And people will always be interested in Swedish products because they'll have all kinds of assumptions about the quality of those products and the service offered by the company behind it, if it's a Swedish company, and so forth. If, on the other hand, you have a weak or a negative image, everything is difficult and everything is expensive. So if you are unlucky enough to be a country that nobody's ever heard of, or even more unlucky, and you've got a country that everybody thinks is somehow bad or dangerous or wicked, everything is expensive and everything is difficult. You're constantly having to justify who you are and explain and say, we're not really what you think. And that just costs so much more money and takes so much more time. And one of the things that I pointed out in my early writings in the 90s about this subject was that this simple fact of country image is actually responsible for much of the global inequality, or certainly for making it worse. Because poor countries not only have to cope with weak institutions and weak infrastructure and weak governance and weak economies, they also have to battle constantly against the headwind of a negative reputation. And they're constantly having to explain themselves and justify themselves and introduce themselves over and over again, and still nobody ever knows anything about them. So I suppose what I began to figure out in the late 90s was that country image was no trivial phenomenon. It was really tremendously important. And one of the things I said in that first paper was that governments today have a sacred responsibility when they come into office to look after the good name of the country that they're temporarily running. And their job is to hand down the good name of that country in at least as good condition as they found it, if not better. And the leaders who go down in history as having handed down their country's image in worse state than they received it will go down in history as bad leaders. And it's impossible not to speculate today, November the 3rd, the day of the presidential election in the United States. How will Donald Trump go down in history should he not be elected to a second term? Is he somebody who made America's standing greater, or did he make America's standing weaker? I can't talk about the US election without giving a little plug for one of my projects. It's a little provocation called the Global Vote. And I first launched it in 2016, around about the time when the American presidency was last up for grabs. And what the Global Vote does is it enables people anywhere anywhere in the world, to vote on the elections of other people's countries. And people will often say, when I say that, they say, why would you want to do that? Of course, the vote doesn't really count. If people vote on the global vote for Joe Biden or Donald Trump, it doesn't actually do anything to get that person elected. But it's a piece of symbolism, and symbols can be tremendously powerful and tremendously important. The point that the global vote is making is that we live in a massively interconnected and interdependent world, where choices, particularly important choices like the election of a new leader, of a new government, doesn't just impact the people of that country, it impacts all of us everywhere. And anybody, as I once reminded Theresa May, the then Prime Minister of Great Britain, when she said that if you're a citizen of the world, you're a citizen of nowhere, I said the people who become elected to run their country join the team that runs the planet, whether they like it or not. And that responsibility is international. It's increasingly difficult to distinguish between domestic and international responsibilities. Where does one stop and where does the other start? And so to get back to my story, let me just finish off by saying the global vote is actually still open until 9 o'clock this evening. So if you feel like casting a vote for the next president of the US and making an important gesture about our fundamental interconnectedness, you're very welcome to do so. You can go straight to the URL, which is globalvote.org, and that will take you to the relevant part of the website. It takes about 30 seconds and it's a bit of fun. And I'll be publishing the split of the votes and saying a bit about where they come from around the world. Anyway, to continue with the story, this idea that the images of nations were very, very important to their progress and prosperity caught on, and it became a bit of a meme, and people started talking about it the whole time. In fact, it became a bit of a scandal. I started finding that people were criticizing me for being rather cynical about the glorious, sacred nation state and talking about it as if it were nothing more, as if countries were nothing more than products on the shelf of some gigantic global supermarket. What I failed to explain to people was that that was not what I wanted. That was just what I observed to be happening. And countries in the intervening years have become absolutely obsessed with their images. They've gone to all kinds of lengths and spent all kinds of absurd sums of money in trying to manipulate the way that they're perceived, because they know that it feeds directly into more trade, more tourism, more investment, and all the rest of it. But the interesting thing is that my research has shown that that just doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. And the reason I know that is because since 2005, I've been running a survey called the Nation Brands Index, which uses a panel of 20,000 people around the world to measure the images of 50 different countries. I do a similar one called the City Brands Index that measures the images of 50 cities. And the extraordinary thing about the Nation Brands Index, which now has collected over 1 billion data points, is that it is, without a shadow of doubt, the most boring social survey ever conducted. It hardly changes from year to year. And it's an extraordinary thing to discover that the images of countries seem practically rusted into place. Nobody ever really seems to want to change their mind about another country. There's really only one exception to that, and that's the United States of America, because it's just about the only foreign country that most people ever think about. The majority of people only ever think about 3 countries, 3. And as I said a minute ago, last time I checked, there were 195. So the conclusion of that is that 192 countries on the planet, to all intents and purposes, to the vast majority of the world's population, simply don't exist. So it hardly matters how much money governments spend on bragging about their assets and their achievements. Nobody notices and nobody cares. And even if they do, they don't change their minds. Because those perceptions, those prejudices, those cliches about other countries are so profoundly ingrained in the psyche and in the culture, we just don't want to let them change. So around about 2012, I thought to myself, it's about time I started trying to come up with some actual answers here, because telling countries that their image is so important to them, and yet at the same time telling them there's no way to change it, it's not really very helpful. So I decided I'd take some time off and I'd use it to examine this enormous database of 1 billion data points and ask it a simple single question. Why do people in the end admire country A more than country B? Because they surely do. Every year, the ones at the top stay at the top, the ones at the bottom stay at the bottom. And what I discovered, to cut a rather long story short, was that by far the most significant reason why anybody would admire a country other than their own is because not they think that country is strong, powerful, dignified, beautiful, wealthy, or any of those things. No, the most likely reason they admire it is because they think it contributes something to the international community. that it does good outside its own borders, that it's a country that you can feel glad that it exists. And that, if you think about it, is a nice discovery, but it's also not difficult to understand why people feel that way about other countries. Because, as I said before, we don't think much about other countries. We don't like to. It's an effort of the intellect, which is difficult to sustain because we're so busy doing other things. And so the country that we most admire is very likely to be the country that we least feel we have to worry about. Everybody admires Norway. Norway is a marginal player in global affairs. It's a lovely little country in many ways, but it's massively admired. It's one of the countries with the biggest, most positive images of any of the countries on the planet. And the reason for that is predominantly because everybody thinks it's a good country. They've heard of something called the Oslo Peace Accord, and they may not be quite sure about the history of that, but they know it's something to do with Israel-Palestine. And people hate conflict, and they love peace. And they think that Oslo is probably in Norway, and therefore, when they go to bed at night, they don't drift off to sleep worrying whether they're going to be awoken at 3 a.m. by Norwegian terrorists standing around their bed. They think, I'm glad Norway exists, and that's an end of it. And they reward Norway for this trust, for this admiration, by going there on holiday, by buying its products and services, by migrating there, by wanting to study there, by hiring Norwegians, and so it goes on. If, on the other hand, you're unlucky enough to be Russia at the moment and you have a rather negative image, people do worry about you as they drift off to sleep at night. And they think to themselves, I don't quite know why, but I have a sense that Russia does not contribute to the peace and stability of the planet on which we live, and that it's not making a safer future for me and my children and my grandchildren. And so they mistrust Russia. And so they don't go there on holiday, and they don't buy its products, and they don't hire its people. And the difference between those simple prejudices, I trust this country, I don't trust that country, can be translated into the flows of trillions of dollars. And it's not just about money. The flows of workers, the flows of migrants, the flows of culture, the flows of diplomacy, the flows of international understanding. So this is a discovery which is really quite important, because I and many, many other people have spent many, many years going around talking to foreign governments and saying to them, look, we live in an age of gigantic shared global challenges, from climate change and migration and pandemics and nuclear proliferation and abuses of human rights, and you've got to do something about it. And so many other governments say, yeah, and they don't. And why is that? Well, it's worth just looking at for a moment. The reality of the matter is that you might think that the reason why we don't make much progress against all of those grand challenges is because we don't know how to, but that's not really the reason at all. We really do know how to. There have been experts working on all of these global challenges for long enough for us to be absolutely pretty sure what the solutions are. We know how to tackle climate change. We know how to deal with migration more fairly and more effectively. We know how to deal with all of these things. The reason that we don't, or the reason that we don't do it very consistently or very rapidly, is because we don't bring enough resources to bear against those problems. And the reason we don't bring enough resources to bear against them is because no single country has got sufficient resources to tackle these gigantic globalized problems. America can't fix climate change even if it wants to, because it's much too big. The European Union can't fix migration even if it wants to, because it's much too big. If we want to fix these global challenges, the countries have to work together. They have to pool their resources. They have to coordinate, cooperate, collaborate. Otherwise, we're just never going to do it. And they don't. And they don't because it's not in the culture of nations to cooperate and collaborate, really. It's in the culture of nations to compete. And it's been that way ever since that morning when we signed the Treaty of Westphalia and the modern nation state came into being. And we were configured as warring, competing tribes. The purpose of the nation state is to defeat other nation states, to come first, to win, to conquer, to steal territory, to steal treasure. I sometimes think that the whole history of humanity can be divided up into three simple periods. There was the first simple period, which was all about conflict. It was all about fighting and stealing from each other and destroying the other. The second phase, which thank heavens we're in now, is the phase of competition, which is a little bit like conflict, but the consequences aren't so dire. Not so many wars, not so much killing, although of course it still goes on, but there's heavy competition between the nations. So the basic idea that all the other nations are just enemy tribes hasn't really gone away. It's still there, but just in a slightly more genteel form. The third stage of the human story is a different one altogether, and that's called collaboration. And that's the one that we have to get to, and we have to get there soon, because if we don't, we're really in trouble. So the state of the world at the moment, you could say, is like this. It's a bunch of basically 17th century warring, competing tribes, frantically trying to tackle a bunch of very 21st century, very globalized problems and failing. We can talk all day about how to fix climate change or how to fix migration or how to fix the pandemic, but the bottom line is we can fix all of them if we only learn how to work together as a single species inhabiting a single planet. We need a change in the culture of governance worldwide from fundamentally competitive to fundamentally collaborative. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't have a problem with competition. Competition is an intrinsic part of human nature. I'm really competitive. I know exactly what it feels like. It's a good instinct. It's lifted billions of people out of poverty. We wouldn't have economic growth. We wouldn't have modern societies without competition. Competition is only a problem when it's the only altar at which we worship. And that's been the case for the last 80 or 100 years. Wisdom consists in being able to combine with courage and imagination, cooperation, collaboration, and competition. And they do work together beautifully. The irony is that this isn't news. Certain industrial sectors have known this for decades. The automotive industry back in the 70s was talking about an experiment called co-opetition, where you mingle cooperation and collaboration within a given sector. The auto industry has done very well out of that habit. It still does it today. Pretty much whichever car you may drive, you'll find that many of its components are actually manufactured by or for one of its competitors. They share value chains, they share distribution. They share all kinds of things. You have to be careful that it doesn't go too far and become an anti-competitive cartel. But the basic principle of being able to combine working together and working for your own interests, working for the common interests and for your own people's interests is a really, really important trick. And it's an experiment which is about 30 years overdue in the public sector, in my opinion. You see, I don't have a problem with President Trump standing up and saying America first. It seems to me to be a statement of the obvious. If you're elected to run a country, of course you put the interests of that country first. That's your job. That's what you've been tasked with doing. But what I've always found slightly boring and slightly depressing and slightly disagreeable about Trump's interpretation of that is the notion that everybody else has to come last. And that's not the way it works. And one of the reasons why I believe that Trump's style of governance has been a tragedy for America is because America, of all countries, has been the one that's done most and worked hardest to prove over the centuries that actually you can come first whilst helping other countries to do well too, and that it's in everybody's interest, and a rising tide lifts all ships. And that way you avoid the tragedy of the commons, which is what we're facing today. So the discovery from my research that the primary driver of a positive national image is cooperation and collaboration, working together with other countries, is so important because it means that I don't have to go to any government anymore and say, please work harder on climate change, please work harder on poverty or migration, because it's the right thing to do. That's approaching a non-moral entity with a moral argument, and it doesn't work. Nation states are not fundamentally moral. They can't really be. It's a whole other conversation. Many, many politicians aren't moral. By saying they aren't moral, I'm not saying they're necessarily immoral. It's just that morality is not the primary driver of their choices. Expediency is usually the primary driver of their choices. And those conversations go nowhere. They say, yeah, I know it's the right thing to do. I'll do something. This is what they say to the United Nations when the UN come along and say, we've got the Sustainable Development Goals. Please, will you sign up to them? And they say, yeah, they sign up to them. But do they do anything? No, because expediency always comes first. Because of this discovery I made with the research which is described in the book, I can now go to any government and say it is in your immediate short-term economic interest to work together with other countries, because the more you do it and the more courage and imagination you bring to bear in doing it, the more people are going to like and admire what you do and who you are. And the more they like and admire you, the more they will spend on your products, on your people, in your territory. Direct, immediate economic self-interest. And this, it seems to me, is an important breakthrough. I'm not a cynic, I hope, but I think that it's much, much more effective to appeal to people's self-interest and to their professional pride in doing the job that they want to do. So I think what we need is, as I said, a change, a revolution in the culture of governance. How that comes about is another matter, and I'm not going to talk about it now because that's another long, long talk. But I just wanted in the last 4 or 5 minutes to talk briefly about the other reason why the world doesn't work. As I say, the culture of governance gets in the way of countries collaborating. But in the end, there's another perhaps bigger and perhaps deeper and perhaps even simpler problem, and that's us. If you write that long list of the 25 or 30 grand challenges that humanity is facing today, and what a scary list it is, and you take a step back and you look at them and you think about it, the other thing you'll realize very, very quickly is that they all have one thing in common. They're all caused by the behavior of human beings, every single one of them. None of them have been perpetrated on us by an unfriendly universe. We've caused all of them. And from that runs a very, very simple equation. If the global challenges caused by the behavior of human beings, what causes the behavior of human beings? The way they were brought up, or the way they were, or the way that they failed to be brought up. And so, as so often in these kinds of discussions, whatever the question is, the answer is education. Now, everybody knows that if you bring up children to be sensitive to the challenges that they're going to face as adults, they'll probably do a better job of dealing with them. We've got the extraordinary example of Greta Thunberg, the Swedish teenager, who, as a direct result of the fact that Swedish schools teach about climate change, the moment she left school, in fact, before she left school, she was running towards climate change instead of running away from it, which is what my generation has done. There are 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 experiments all around the world proving every day that if you bring up children with a proper sense of the world needing their support and needing their help, and the right ways to behave in order to protect each other and to protect the planet and to protect the international community, then you'll get a generation that behaves right. And most of these problems will go away. It sounds a little bit like Donald Trump, but they will. They'll go away. The problem is, of course, that all those programs are very fragmentary. And I'm just in the process now of starting up a new project, which I call the Good Generation, which is an attempt to try to rationalize and make more efficient some of that granularity in the education programs. You see, the problem is that you've got Swedish schools teaching climate change, and you've got Kenyan schools teaching tolerance, and you've got Greek schools teaching about how to cope with job losses or a failing economy. And you end up with children who've learned a little bit about some of the problems, and it's different from what other children elsewhere have learned about some of the other problems. And the net effect of all of this teaching is that it does tend to drive the world even further apart. These are all good subjects and they're all taught for the right reasons, but the cultural differences, the differences of emphasis create such a granularity, such a degree of fragmentation. It's so piecemeal that it's not doing anything on the whole. We need a different generation to replace the ones at the moment. We need new generations who, as I said before, run towards the challenges instead of running away from them. So I think the time has come for us to say we need to do this universally and immediately. It's time for the world to momentarily press pause and ask itself a few questions. How would we actually like all of our children to be raised in the coming years so that we can be absolutely sure that they'll help us to get out of the mess that we're in at the moment? All these NGOs who write on their websites, we need to leave the world in a better condition for our children. This is sheer arrogance. Some of these problems like climate change, they've taken generations to perpetrate. You can't fix them just before you check out, just by starting an NGO. It needs a new race of human beings behaving in a new way for at least a generation before the basic system starts to change. So the Good Generation is a project that basically says, let's start now. Let's have a big global conversation where everybody in the world gets together and says, what do we all agree, despite our religious and our cultural and our historical and our geographical differences, what are those fundamental values that we all believe in that will help the next generation of children to cope better than, heaven forgive us, we have? And then once we've got that content, once we've had that conversation, we work it into a new global compact on educational values and virtues and skill sets. And we get all the education ministers in the world to sail into St. Mark's Square in Venice and sign it. I mentioned St. Mark's Square in Venice because I've been promised I can borrow it for the signing ceremony. And then we figure out how to implement it, which is a whole other deal. But the important thing, I think, right now is to get a global agreement on all challenges, all children, all subjects, and start work on the next generation now, because that's our best hope. It's probably our only hope. And for the people who say, as many people do, you're going to have a job doing that, because nothing's more culturally sensitive than the education of children. They're right. The education of children is incredibly sensitive, and rightly so. Children need to be protected from social engineering. They soak up information like a sponge. Changing the minds of adults is incredibly difficult by contrast. And I think the answer that I give to people like that, generally speaking, is to say, would you please go back and have another look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? Please go back and have another look at the UN Charter. Two of the finest achievements of humanity, and they prove that when we really, really, really need to get our act together and agree on something in a time of incredible stress, we can do it, and we've done it before. Time of incredible stress, it's very interesting that both of those documents, of course, appeared shortly after the world had been ravaged by 2 world wars. I don't think we're in a very different situation today. We're in a situation today where we suddenly realized that the space, the gap, separating our stable, beautiful, peaceful world from total chaos was as thin as a cigarette paper. All it took was one very powerful politician spreading the idea that nobody knew the difference between truth and falsehood anymore, and one pandemic, and we are facing total global chaos for the first time since the Second World War. So this is a time of enormous urgency and enormous stress. And I think thanks to that time, it might be possible. It might just be possible for us to get almost everybody to agree on these things. And that, in addition to a bunch of other projects that I'm doing, is how I'm working to try and get things working a bit better than they have done in the past. That's all I'm going to say now. There's a whole lot more, and if I had another hour, I'd carry on, but I'd love to have a conversation and hear what you have to say about it and what you'd like to ask me. Thanks.
Roger, first of all, thank you very much. I think everybody would agree that that's an amazing talk. So can I ask everybody to unmute their mics and give a big round of applause to Simon? Yes, there's real people.
That is the oddest sound.
Yay, yay. Well, I can do this one. I don't know. Anyway, let me break this open to the floor in a couple of ways. First of all, Jill had approached me. She runs a group called Global Collaboration. Jill, would you like to introduce yourself and have any comments?
Yeah, hi Simon. This is a great thrill for me to be here because I've been following your TED Talks and the things that you're doing, and I could not agree more with everything that you've just said. Apart from, I don't think we need to leave it all to the youngsters. I think we need to start now, and that's what I've been doing as part of Collaboration Global, because to me, collaboration is the tool that we can use, not in the way that we have used it in the past, for pure leverage, for a transactional perspective, but from a place of harmony, and a way for people to truly come together and create a new culture. So we have got a very small itty-bitty community, but that are practicing a new way of being, and we're moving away from the world that's out there of fear, scarcity and competition to one that we've created, this love, connection and abundance. And when you start to live in abundance and you start to see your world from a place of love and that connection to yourself that we seem to have lost, and then you can connect more emphatically to other people. And we look at humanity as a connection, and we always say one of our core values is human being first. We don't care how tall you are or short you are or thin you are, fat you are, gay, straight, black, white, whatever. You're a human being first. Ergo, we love you. And from that, we respect you and we trust you. And it's kind of a bit like eBay that, it's up to you to lose that. And it's being in that space. And when you see what can be generated from positive relationships, wonderful collaborations around business. Yes, it's not a dirty word to earn some money, but at the same time, it's about how can we make the place, the space that we are in as cooperative, collaborative and positive and proactive as possible, so that we then start having lots of little projects that dip in all over the place. So to understand that you're working to see how governments can change, from my philosophy, we take it from the grassroots, change the culture with many, many people as possible and hit a tipping point where the governments have got to go, hang on a minute, what are they doing over there? Should we do some of that over there? This is all my naivety that, this is how I see it in a very Pollyanna way.
Okay. I don't call that naive, I call that wise.
Thank
Let me
you.
move on to a couple of other people. First of all, I don't know if you've seen any of the comments. There's a lot of people echoing what you said. Roger, I think you have a couple of questions.
Yes, I do. One of the things that fascinates me, Simon, is this whole territory, and it's just the timing of what it is that you brought up, particularly in your book. I'm not sure how long ago it is that you published it, but why did you choose now as the time to publish it, and why did you write it as you did?
These weren't choices, really. I mean, people sometimes say to me, "Isn't this the most terrible moment to be breaching cooperation and collaboration and changing the system?" This is the perfect moment. I'm insanely optimistic at the moment. I'm the only person I know who's just full of optimism about the state of the world. It's partly a sort of idiotic fatalism that one just knows from studying history, that humanity has this distinguished history of not changing until 1159. And it feels as if we're quite close to 1159. And you know, when it's a minute to midnight, you know that people will change because we always have done. People have become separated from their convictions and from their complacency in a way that's marvelous to behold. I can talk to anybody now about radical change and they listen. 5 years ago, they weren't listening because they just thought everything's okay, it's not going to change. Obviously, there's the little issue of atmospheric CO2, which has a lag of some 10 to 20 years in it. So 1159 may already be far too late for climate change. That's a worry. But for the rest of it, this has to be the right moment. And in terms of the way that I wrote it, I think you're probably referring to the fact that it reads slightly more like a loopy adventure story than a dreary textbook about international relations. The fact is that because of what I do, I buy and read every single book that ever comes out on what's gone wrong with the world and international relations and politics and macroeconomics and other stuff that I feel I ought to be reading, and they're awfully good, and I can't read them because they're so dreary and so depressing. And I thought to myself, if I'm going to add another book to the already enormous pile of books out there about the state of the world, I've got to do people the favor of making it readable. So I thought I'll make it a sort of comical, tragical, autobiographical travelogue, including all of the strange episodes that have happened to me over the years as an advisor to people who run countries. The night that I tried and failed to pour soup into the lap of Vladimir Putin at dinner, and the day I got locked in a royal lavatory in Bhutan, and thus missed the most important meeting of my life. These things are all kind of quite funny, but what they do is they introduce characters and places and people, and it makes it readable, I hope. This is what people are saying so far, but woven into those episodes and anecdotes, some of which are truly ridiculous, is the story of how country by country by country, I started beginning to figure out actually why the world doesn't work. And country by country by country, beginning to form some slightly more grown-up thoughts about how we might be able to fix it. The thing I really just desperately didn't want to write was another of those books that said, wouldn't it be lovely if everybody was lovely? There are too many of those around. And yes, of course, it would be lovely if everybody was lovely, but it doesn't work that way.
Okay. Roger, we have a couple more questions. Simon, we have a couple more questions. We're going to, first of all, Peter, I think he would like you to talk a little bit more about Neil Buff's book, Co-opetition. Then Carl would like to add a comment. And then after that, Ali has a question for you.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't get the first one. It was about cooperation and collaboration.
Co-opetition. You remember
oh, co-opetition.
So you might want to mention a bit more about Neil Buff's book and about game theory and so on.
Yes. I'm not really an expert on co-opetition, but one of the most important factors in this element is this curious component, which is sometimes called creativity. Creative is another difficult, slippery word, and it means something different to everybody who uses it. I have a very simple definition of the word creative. To me, it's just the opposite of boring. That's all it is. And governments on the whole, when they're making policies, tend to try deliberately to be as boring as possible. And I know why they do that. It's because they have a very clear sense that they're dealing with the lives and livelihoods of millions of people, and that's an incredibly serious responsibility. And therefore they must behave in an incredibly serious way. And the best way that they can usually figure out to do this is by always doing things that have been done before, whether or not they worked, but just because it's reassuring, because they're boring. And actually this is fatal. There's a sort of a tradition in most governments that I've worked with, where you have to leave your heart and your soul in the refrigerator before you go to work in the morning. And innovation and creativity and that spark of courage and imagination are just driven out of it. And this is desperately unfortunate, because it prevents us from being able to marry cooperation and collaboration in effective ways. It prevents us from being able to harmonize domestic and international responsibilities. It's a funny thing, but whenever people get to the stage where they're in charge of a country and they're in charge of making policy, it doesn't matter what their background, left wing, right wing, they all seem to end up with this belief that anything you do that's good for your own people is going to harm somebody else somewhere. And whatever you do that's good for the planet is going to damage your own economy. And that the domestic and international are somehow mutually exclusive. So there's no point in even going there. The number of leaders that I've spoken to about this, they say, yeah, it doesn't work. Honestly, those two things that we can't make them meet. And I say, well, are you talking about all policies all the time? Let's have a look at some of the individual ones and see if we can't just marry those things up. And what you discover pretty quickly is that if you bring the spirit of creativity to bear, and this particularly comes from collaborating more with people from other countries, if you work with other countries and other cultures, it brings so much creativity and so much innovation into the policy-making arena. Supposing we're trying to deal with a very domestic issue like nurses' pay in Ireland, for example. The typical way of approaching that would be to get a bunch of public health experts and politicians from Ireland sitting in a room figuring out how to solve the problem. Because they've got the same cultural background, the chances of them coming up with anything new are almost zero, because your cultural background defines to a scary degree what you can invent and what you can come up with. If, on the other hand, you say, look, we may think of this as a domestic problem, but think how many other countries are facing something similar. And you create a random temporary team of 6 other countries. Maybe just because they begin with the same letter. Let's have Italy because that begins with I and so does Ireland. And let's have Iceland because that begins with I as well. I did this once with Sierra Leone. That was a difficult one because there's Sri Lanka, and then you have to go to St. Louis, South London, St. Lucia. Doesn't matter whether they're countries or cities, but the more people you bring together and the more you stir up that polycultural soup, the better the ideas become. And then you suddenly begin to realize there's a whole world of policy making out there, which most governments have never even imagined, where you can start combining those effects and producing benefits at home, benefits abroad, which are even greater than they would have been if you hadn't done it. And you actually end up making better domestic policy. So it wasn't exactly the question, I'm conscious of that, but it is perhaps the most important discovery for policymakers to make. This isn't a compromise. This isn't about trying to find a way through a really difficult trap. It's a way of combining different ways of looking at things together to produce new and better policies. Now, she said there was a comment.
Yeah, Carl wanted to say something, and then Ali, you can ask your question. Carl, very quickly, do you want to just?
Yeah. So can you hear me?
I can, Carl. Hi.
Yeah. Simon, I want to compliment you on the approach you're taking.
Thank you.
It strikes me as trying to find practical benefit for good, laudable behavior, not using the moral argument as you place it as much as self-interest. I have a chapter in my book, the Fair Share Model, called Cooperation as a New Tool for Competition.
Oh, wow.
I put an offer in the chat box for anybody who sends me an email. I've got the email address in there. I'll send a chapter. But one of the points I made there was we're in fractious times and big solutions to big problems are very difficult to come around. So, but it's still in human nature. And you can see lots of evidence that we like to cooperate. We find benefits. So the challenge, and I think you're addressing it, is how to find non-ideological solutions that call on this wellspring of a desire to cooperate, to find benefits doing so that isn't the moral argument per se as much as, hey, you're better off because you're doing it. So I think you're exactly on the right track.
Yeah. Can I just, Manoj, can I just pick up on something that Carl said there, because I think it's incredibly important, the non-ideological part. Because one of the things that, as we all know, makes all of this kind of progress so difficult at the moment is the extreme tribalism that we find is penetrating just about every area of public and private life. And one of the things I always say is that if any of my projects, whether it's the Good Country Index or the book or the Good Generation Project, if that ends up becoming or being seen to be a quote unquote liberal insurgency against the rising tide of nationalism, then I failed. Because the one thing that is really important that all of us try to do is to bring the warring tribes together and not to separate them even further. And one of the things that I find myself saying lots and lots to people is that globalist who you hate, or that localist who you hate, that's not a member of an enemy tribe. That's just you on a different day. And think about it. If you're a deeply committed conservative, you can understand what it means to worry about the state of the world if you're not stupid. And if you're a deeply committed globalist, as I am, it doesn't take much imagination to think how much you care about the little village that you live in. And we are all of us mixtures of left and right, of progressive and conservative, of liberal and radical, of globalist and localist. There's some of all of that in all of us. It's just a matter of degree and emphasis and context and mainly rhetoric. And so if we start with the understanding that the people of the other tribe, the people who vote for the politician that we despise, they're not mad or bad or stupid. They're just you on a different day, maybe with a slightly different history, maybe with a slightly different background, but they're still you, and you are them. And if we just start every conversation with that in mind, we get so much further. Now, I know that I'm veering towards the wouldn't it be lovely if everybody was lovely talk here, but actually, I really do think that's the truth. And I've tried to behave like that, and I found that it has miraculous consequences. Basically, you don't get arguments anymore, you get conversations.
Okay. Ali, your question, then the next one after that, after Ali, Kim has asked a question about, given that the majority world has been undeciphered for so long, how do you envision empowering them to engage and have an equal seat at the table? And then after that...
I'm not going to remember these, Manoj.
All right. Okay. Well, let's start with
Ali. With Ali. Hi, Ali. Good to see you.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. So, Simon, part of your book, you talk about, how back do we go to blame or admire a country? For example, you actually end up using the Persian Empire as an example, that like 4,500 years ago, there was this amazing, gigantic empire that was one of the largest in the world and did so many good things. But how far do we go to look back into the country's history? A much modern history. I'm Iranian myself, just in case. So much modern history of Iran. We had the revolution in 1978. That after that, Iran's picture was going deep down, year by year, over and over. And right now, Iran does not have a really nice picture for the rest of the world. I mean, and this has not been a good journey for Iranians either. I mean, back in 2009, we had the price of $1 being about 997, or about 1,000 tumans. In 2018, that got multiplied by 11. So in 2018, a dollar was about 11,000 tumans, and now in 2020, it started out 20,000 tumans, and now it's 27,000 tumans. So in about 11 years, we got the price of dollar got raised by 2,700% for Iranians. And this is something that only the people have suffered from. I mean, what do Iranians think they could do when they live in a country that the government is not willing to collaborate with the rest of the world, and the people of the government only think about themselves and their own benefits? They haven't suffered at all with all the sanctions and all the things that the world has done to stop Iran from doing what they're doing. How do people like that participate in the good country index and in the picture that you have for the world?
There has to come a point, I think, where the pain and suffering of the Iranian people is so great that the leadership will have to question whether they are in fact doing the right thing, and whether isolationism is a viable proposition for a country without a very large economy. It's not a viable position even for the United States, quite frankly. Until that point, it's difficult to imagine, short of another revolution, heaven forbid, that anything can change, because the Iranian leadership is so deeply committed to the path that it's chosen of non-alignment. And it's kept alive by the fact that it has some friends. So I don't know the answer to that. There's obviously a domestic discussion to be had about how does one get through to the government and how does one try to persuade them. And I won't go down there, but there is a possibility that one day, perhaps in the not very distant future, the Iranian government will be looking for a way out of the corner that it's painted itself into. And we'll be saying, actually, you know what? Without compromising any of our pride in ourselves or in our religion or in our traditions or in our society, we do need to rejoin the international community. And then from that point onwards, from the point that that admission is made by the leadership, then it becomes a fascinating journey. All I would say is it's not actually quite as difficult as it may sound, because what I've found in many, many situations in this past is that human beings, I once said there's only one superpower left on the planet, and that's international public opinion. And that superpower loves nothing like a sinner redeemed, a country that had departed from the international community and wants to come back. And so the journey back to acceptance and acknowledgement is surprisingly quick sometimes. There's an old Arabic saying that reputation arrives on foot and leaves on horseback. Maybe you have the same saying in Farsi. The opposite is also true. You can sometimes regain a reputation far more quickly than you expect because people want you to. The way, for example, that Spain's image recovered so swiftly after the end of the Franco regime is a very good example of that. People wanted Spain back again. And I was saying, I had a webinar this afternoon with some American kids, and they were saying, supposing Biden gets in, how long is it going to take for America to recover its reputation? And I said about 5 minutes, really, because the world wants America to come back. They want it to be an active member of the international community. The community wants more members.
I love the idea of the prodigal country. I think
prodigal country, exactly.
So, Kim, would you like to ask the question, or shall I rephrase the question?
No, I'm happy to ask it. Essentially, I believe that one of the problems is that there's been such disparity between what we know as quote unquote the West and the West, if you will, the majority world, and frankly, the majority world also lives within the borders of the West. It's those that are underserved. So I'm questioning how you envisage empowering the underserved to engage and get an equal seat at the table, because without that equal seat, it really is just the same sort of patriarchal colonial future, just packaged differently.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't want to sound trite about this, but whatever the question is at this level, the answer is almost always education. And what I would love to see is, I'd love to see governments also in the developing world gauging their progress not by economic growth or by productivity or by profit margins, but by the number of new skills that they've taught to the children in their schools year by year by year by year, because that's what will generate the ability to treat with the rest of the world on equal terms in the longer term. I think part of the problem is that so often all of these initiatives of trying to make the world work better are configured in a sort of Victorian philanthropic way. This idea that all the problems in the world can be summed up by the statement that there are too many dollars above the line and not enough dollars below the line. And if only we could transfer enough spare dollars from the north to the south, then all the world's problems will be solved. And it just isn't that simple, as we know. And I would like to always emphasize the fact that being a good country and participating in the international community is not in any way barred to poorer or weaker countries. It's not about money. So the Good Country Index, which I didn't mention, but some of you may be familiar with, it's a study which I run every year. I've been doing it since 2014. What it tries to do is to measure how much each country on earth contributes to the world outside its borders. It completely excludes all the domestic stuff. And one of the results of the Good Country Index that pleased me most in the first edition was the fact that Kenya managed to arrive in the top 30. Now, we're not used to seeing country rankings where an African nation with a small economy ends up in the top anything of these kinds of rankings. The reason it did it was because, I'm glad to say, I'd been successful in configuring the way that the Good Country Index worked in such a way that it didn't depend on money. And it didn't depend on your state of development. Only 2 of the 35 indicators in the Good Country Index are anything to do with how much money you've got. And Kenya managed to get into the top 30 because it engages effectively with the international community despite having a small economy. Even receiving aid is a way of engaging with the international community just as much as giving aid. So participation is really an important thing. And so many governments in developing countries say to me, this is nothing to do with us. We can't afford to be good. We need to get our own act together. We need to feed our own people. We need to get our own society and polity working properly before we can start worrying about the rest of the world. And I detest that attitude. I think it's absolute nonsense because in any case, experience proves that no country ever thinks it's rich enough to be able to stop getting richer. No country, no matter how rich, ever thinks, now we've arrived at a stage where we can start seriously worrying about the rest of the world. They just don't get that. They never do. And we'll still be talking about climate change when it's far too late. And we'll still be talking about poverty and inequality when it's far too late. So I think that we've got to start looking at a system where any country, I don't mean ignore the history, and I don't mean ignore the damage done by the colonists to the colonies or anything of that sort. But we've got to get to a stage where we start accepting that all nation states, as in international law, have equal rights and equal responsibilities for the future of the international community. And they're all treated as equal and they behave as equal. Unless we can get there, we can't get anywhere. And then we get into those silly arguments about how certain countries shouldn't need to bother to do anything about climate change because they didn't cause it. This is like 5-year-old children arguing. It was a messy answer, Kim, I'm sorry, to a very big question.
Okay, I'm very conscious of the time. So the next one was Geraldine O'Brien. Geraldine, are you still here? Hello, Geraldine.
Geraldine's name is there, yeah.
Geraldine, do you want to put your question about...
I would rather if you said it because I'm surely trip over it.
All right, okay. So
Thank you.
She would like to know what advice you would have to encourage countries to face up to the human rights issue.
I guess what I would say is increasingly and more every year, the world is watching. And abuses of human rights, even within the apparent privacy of your own borders, are visible to everybody. And the data is very clear. If you exercise abuses of human rights, if you persecute your own people or some part of your own population, that will severely damage your image in the eyes of the world. And that in turn will severely curtail your potential for attracting foreign investment, tourists, migrants, the respect and attention of the world's media, productive diplomatic and cultural relations with other countries. In other words, you will cut yourself off from the international community. And if you cut yourself off from the international community, your economy will stagnate. And that can happen relatively quickly. So the great thing about the world that we live in today is that nobody can really hide. These things get talked about, they get broadcast. Thank God for the internet, thank God for social media. People will find out. Of course, there's some issues to do with reliability of sources and so forth, but those are easily soluble problems. So I think that's what I'd say. People are watching, you can't hide, and it will damage your prospects.
Okay. Rory, would you like to add a comment to what you wrote here on the chat and your views about Ireland and its openness?
Yeah, I mean, just I think Ireland has gone through, interestingly, when we were talking there about Iran, we were isolated at one stage. We were a country that cut ourselves off. And education was actually the answer. And the younger people voted with their feet and they left the country. And essentially, but then they came through and generated wealth. You know, so we're a good example of a country that's done a journey. Just on your last contribution there, Simon, what would you say about China? China are guilty of major human rights abuses, and to date it has not interfered with their power in the world.
Well, it has, in the sense that China's image is not very good at the moment. When you measure it, you know, it's way below the most admired countries, and it does, in one form or another, pay the penalty for the bad image it's earning. The thing is that countries are complicated, and big countries are particularly complicated, and it's very hard really to talk about a country as if it were a single entity behaving in a simple way. Even a centrally controlled, undemocratic country like China is not tremendously strategic all the time. And it does some things which send off certain messages, and it does other things which send off others. If all you ever knew about China was Xi Jinping's pronouncements on the One Belt, One Road initiative, you would say China is by far the goodest country on earth. Because what Xi Jinping talks about is pure good country. He talks about the harmonious rise of China in the world. He talks about the importance of cooperation and collaboration. I swear to God, he's read all my stuff. And you think to yourself, how ironic, what times we live in where the ungoodest spiel of the lot, by far, comes from the leader of the free world, the President of the United States. And the goodest spiel of the lot comes from the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party. But the fact of the matter is that that's only one of many things that China are doing. And some of it's good and some of it's bad. The Good Country Index does its best to see if it can do an overall balance, but that's obviously a fiction, because the good doesn't exactly rule out the bad and the bad doesn't exactly rule out the good. They both exist side by side, and it's complex. But having said all that, I think that China is still a valuable presence in the global community. I'm still glad it's there, for all its faults and for all the things it's doing wrong. And I do see the possibility of it gradually, cautiously aligning itself more and more and more with the values that the majority of countries accept as being acceptable values. We're impatient in the West. We always want countries that we consider that fall short of international mores. We're always impatient with the speed at which they progress. But sometimes the leaders of those countries know what the right speed is. And I think it's a very, very dangerous thing. It's a phenomenon of globalization which is very dangerous, that societal change, values change, cultural changes, which can take place within one society at the speed at which that society can deal with, very slowly, generation after generation after generation, are suddenly visited on other countries that have no foreknowledge of this issue at all. And then it's not evolution, it's revolution. So suddenly we're expecting countries in the developing world to adopt all of the liberal progressive values that the West has taken 5, 6, 7 generations to quietly absorb. And it's this two-speed world, the different speeds of progress and adaptation of common values that causes the most trauma. So I think we have to be a little bit patient, and that's an incredibly hard thing to say when you know that people are being mistreated, abused, and possibly tortured and killed. But it's a fact. Societies move slowly.
I'm conscious of the time, but I do want to get a couple more questions to you very quickly, if you permit. Okay. One, Anna, do you want to ask it? Anna, Cecile, are you there, Anna? Or shall I ask it for you?
Yeah. No, I was just wondering about the Good Education Program. Wondering what kind of topics or subjects you're suggesting, because obviously you mentioned a few that some countries are currently doing, but it's the global kind of outlook that's the most important. But how do you, what would the subjects be? Basically, religion?
No. You've put your finger on one of the complexities of this project. The answer is that they won't be subjects. There is already all schools almost everywhere in the world already have far too many subjects to fit in the curriculum. It really doesn't matter where you go. If you say, we would like to suggest that you adopt a new topic in your curriculum, they will scream and run out of the room because they've hardly got time to deal with the ones they've got. So the one thing that I don't want the Good Generation to become is another NGO proposing yet another set of educational materials to be adopted around the world by schools. What I would like to do is to respect the ecosystem which is already there. There are hundreds upon thousands, as I said before, of projects of NGOs, but also traditional providers. And there are the technology-based providers like the Khan Academy, who are teaching directly via the internet to kids. There are all kinds of things going on. So the Good Generation project is about attempting to embrace that universe and give it an ever so slight shift towards a commonly agreed set of values. Exactly how that will work, it's a little bit early to say. We're plowing through that challenge at the moment. It's quite difficult, but there's a metaphor for it, which for me at any rate captures what it is we're trying to do. I don't know whether when you were at school, Anna Cecile, you had to do this experiment where you had a piece of paper with some iron filings on top of it, and you put a magnet underneath the piece of paper. And then suddenly this chaotic pile of little metal particles springs instantly into a kind of infinity symbol. And the magnet hasn't even touched it. It's just appeared below the piece of paper. That's what the Good Generation is trying to do. It's trying to provide some commonly agreed universal values and virtues-based directions that all of the existing education can somewhat emphasize. We're not trying to teach every child in the world how to deal with climate change or how to deal with tolerance. Others are trying that. They may succeed or they may fail. What we're trying to do is to introduce a certain note of critical faculty so that no matter what situation the child finds him or herself later on in life, there's a little Jiminy Cricket in their head that says, is this right? Before they do it, before they join the herd and do what everybody else is doing.
So it's teaching more about morality.
Well, no, it's not even teaching about morality, because we'd never get away with that. Yeah. Nothing is more sensitive than morality. I mean, the mere fact that I'm quite naturally, as a Western European, talking about it in a secular way would appear monstrous to the majority of people on the planet. And most people on the planet are religious, and they'll say, how can you possibly talk about educating children and building a better society without mentioning religion? That's just insane. So it's not morality either. As far as possible, I'm trying to make it practical. You remember I described those steps backwards from the global challenges to the behaviors that cause them to the things that you might learn. So to give you an example, I decided when my children were 6 that I wanted to be absolutely sure that they wouldn't grow up as racists, because I dislike racism intensely. And so I had a long think about how best to prepare them for a world in which there is a great deal of racism and intolerance. And I found myself teaching them cultural anthropology. It's actually a really good subject for 6-year-olds. if you take it sounds crazy, but if you take a simple model of cultural anthropology, like the Dutch writer Geert Hofstede, who writes beautifully and simply on cultural values, you can teach that to 6-year-olds and they love it. And what it does is it creates a small miracle. First of all, it makes them more curious about racial and cultural differences, which is much better than political correctness. Political correctness is a kind of racism that treats difference as if it were a disability, something you shouldn't talk about for fear of offending people. I mean, if I suddenly point at Ali and say, how come you look different from me, Ali? Is it because you're Iranian? He's not going to be offended. He's going to say, no, of course, it's because I'm Iranian. Of course I look different from you, right? So there's the thing, you see. I thought you would say, hey, how does it feel to have a skin that's so much darker than mine? That's absolutely natural, and it's absolutely human, and it's absolutely great, right? Yeah. And political correctness is, don't talk about it because you might offend her. Why would you be offended about me referring to the fact that you're black? I mean, that's so stupid. And
no,
so
it is a touchy subject, definitely. And I just became mom to a mixed baby, or biracial, however you want to. And that subject, I have no idea how to deal with. Again, right. Just how do you teach children things like that? Which
wait till they're 6 and teach them cultural anthropology. And what that does, okay, is it basically deprives. I mean, they're not going to be racist anyway. How could they be if they're mixed race? Well, actually, no, some are. The teaching anthropology encourages children to take a scientific pride in the understanding of cultural difference. And that basically deprives intolerance of oxygen. It just takes it away. You can't be stupid if you're taking a scientific pride in understanding things well. So knowledge is the answer. And that's why I don't believe that teaching tolerance really works, because it's not a subject. In the same way that teaching climate change, it's not really a subject. What you need to do is you need to give them a real useful subject that includes in it that gene of understanding cultural difference. And then you are incapable of intolerance because you're just too smart.
I mean, I think that's very profound. You know, the trouble is so many of these movements become a fashion, and then the corporates right behind, you know, the Black movement or the LGBT. You just accept people as they are. Very well. Look, conscious of time, there's another question here.
Thanks,
from about what is it, Sean Fay? Sorry, Kim Kander. Yeah, Melton. Melton, would you like to ask your question, or shall I put it for you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Simon. This is very interesting. My question is, actually, I have two. I am taking a critical thinking course right now, so and I understand the. I think in the complex society that we live in, the complexity through diversity and everything going on globally, I feel like even in adult level, the critical thinking is a major subject that we are lacking. We teach at schools, how we teach them is, you know, the subject matter, but really critical thinking of being able to think for oneself is, I feel like it's missing in the society. Perhaps that could be, what are your thoughts on that? And then the second question, very short, are you using also positive peace index in your studies?
Positive peace index, no. Okay. That sounds like a Turkish name, Melton.
Yes, I'm originally from Turkey, but live in Montreal.
In Montreal, okay. Good, great to meet you. Critical thinking, yes. As I said earlier on, I think to Anna Cecile, I don't think that the Good Generation project is going to have subjects in it, even at the level of critical thinking. But I think that we are going to be actively seeking out the projects in the educational systems and the products that emphasize those kinds of valuable inputs. In the end, it won't be me, thank heavens, who decides what are the valuable inputs. That will be the result of our big global conversation. There's a wonderful AI platform today that enables you to have conversations in natural language in real time with infinite numbers of participants. So we won't have to do any dumb surveys where people say, you know, where you say, tick the list for the value that you like best. We'll actually be able to have an open conversation with people in every single one of 195 countries. that's going to be the process that will lead to a list of what we think are the most useful, most important, most valuable learnings, let's just call them that. And then, as I say, we won't be teaching them, but we will be helping and supporting and encouraging the providers that are featuring those kinds of inputs. And critical thinking is definitely one of my favorites. So if I can put my thumb on the weighing machine and push that one through, I will, because I believe in it. But I also think that some of those subjects that teach self-knowledge, whether it's meditation or mindfulness or what have you, all of those are incredibly valuable, because they help a sense of repose, and they help people not to rush into things, and they help people to know themselves, and they help people not to waste energy trying to control the things they can't control. So there's an awful lot of good stuff out there. It's almost too much. It's like I'm like a kid in a sweet shop. I don't know which one to choose. So it's good that it's not me that's choosing it. Okay. And then this index, I don't know anything about it. This is insane, but it sounds as if it might be a useful contributor to the Good Country Index.
I will definitely find a way to send it to you. It's Global Peace Index and Positive Peace Index.
And who publishes it?
It is Institute of Economics and Peace from Australia, and they have been publishing big reports, and they have, the peace is based on 8 pillars, and none of them is monetary either. It is mostly their internal relationship with their people, their systems. It could be very interesting to compare your index with their compact index.
Yeah, it sounds as if it's very likely one of the reasons we didn't include it at the beginning is because it's measuring something domestic. The only indicators that I include in the Good Country Index are the ones that specifically measure an external impact, positive or negative.
Well,
so
sorry for interrupting, but what they are measuring is not only internal, but also their relationship with other countries.
Okay.
So what they are measuring is negative index, which will be, negative peace is the absence of violence.
Yeah.
And then the positive index is what do they do, what institutions they provide, what collaborations do they do with other countries. Fantastic. To be able to bring positive peace.
Okay, Ali has just posted the URL on the chat box, so I've got that now. Thanks, Ali. I'll look that up for sure. We do obviously measure in fact, there's a whole segment in the Good Country Index which is called Contributions to Global Peace and Security, and that includes some sort of obvious data like how many people have you killed during the last year outside your own borders. Call me old-fashioned, but I think that's wrong. And how many weapons do you export? The number of people I get ringing me up from countries like Austria and saying, yeah, we export loads of pistols, but they're for policemen. And I just sort of think, yeah, okay, fine, whatever.
Okay. Simon, this is the last question, and I'm really conscious. Surev Das, are you still here, Surev? Hello? I think they might have left. So, Simon, I'm going to say a big thank you. Could everybody unmute and give Simon a big applause and thank you, please?
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you so much. It's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Love to do this every evening.
Yeah.
Well, maybe in the new year, we might organize another event. We'll have a chat afterwards. I hope everybody enjoyed it. Any other quick feedback or comments before I shut down?
Thank you.
What's the best way to get in touch with Simon if we wanted to continue the conversation?
Send me an email. It's simon@simonanholt.com.
Thank you very much.
And if that doesn't work or you can't remember it or what have you, just LinkedIn. I think a lot of people here are on LinkedIn. I am too. It's always a good way to get in touch.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Simon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.